How did you get interested in writing? What's the process in your life that led you to this?
I think the thing that drew me to writing initially was watching some of the work of Dennis Potter, who was a fantastic television writer in the UK. And what struck me about his work, and this was in the late 70s, early 80s, certainly the late 70s, was the imagination and the daring. And also the sense that he had a wonderful knack of creating an imaginative world, and at the same time being critical of the world that we lived in. So I always found his work really exciting. And I think in the back of my mind there was a thought that actually I quite like the possibility of being able to write. Then I left school and I went to drama school. I trained at LAMDA, where I currently work as head of acting and teach students acting. And I trained in technical theatre because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And about 5 weeks into the training, I went into a rehearsal room and watched what the director did, and I suddenly thought, that's the job for me. So thereafter, it was a question of trying to find myself in situations where I could be in rehearsal rooms, watching the work of directors, because I really liked the idea of the overview, seeing how they took words on a page and translated those words into action and a story that came alive through the work of the actors, the designers, and all the collaborators that would work on a project. So after that, I worked for a number of theatre companies in the UK, travelling around doing national tours. And then my girlfriend at the time, she wanted to go back home to Australia, so we got on a plane and went off to Australia, where I lived for 10 years. And while I was in Australia, what happened was I worked for a company down in Canberra called Theatre ACT. And two of the people there, Jennifer Leslie and Bernard Hawes, were about to form their own company in a town called Orange. And what happened was that I gained a place at NIDA, which is the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Sydney, on the postgraduate directing course, which was run by a man called Paul Thompson, who now teaches film writing and playwriting, screenwriting and playwriting at Tisch in New York. Paul was new to the job. He had a group of 6 students to work under him as potential directors, and I had really a fantastic year. It was a transformative year. And one of the things that stuck in my mind was Paul's writer's studio. He got a group of young Australian writers together to work over a period of time with his directors to develop new writing. And it was at that point that I sort of got the bug to go back into writing, or at least to think, yeah, I could do some of this. So I finished the course, I set up my own theatre company, I directed a number of plays, and towards the last year or two that I was in Australia, I started to write, and I wrote a play called New Australia, which a group of actors and myself got together to do at the Bondi Pavilion Theatre. And although we got some very good critical notices, we didn't exactly sell out, but it was a great learning curve. That first play, you see the mistakes also as much as the successes, and it taught me a great deal about being economical with exposition, about how to perhaps reveal backstory and so on, and also how to sort of wind up a play and drive it, get a motor going. So I think one of the reviews at the time described it as being a little bit wordy at the start, but it gathered momentum and went somewhere in the second half. And on reflection, I think they were absolutely bang on the money with that. So having written a play, that really got me fired up about the possibility of doing more writing. But then life gets in the way of these things, and my wife and I decided to come back to the UK. And I got a job with Sir Peter Hall, who was the artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre, and he was running his own company at the time, the Peter Hall Company. And he was directing Piaf with Elaine Page, so I went and became his AD, assistant director. I did a number of productions for him, but in between times, LAMDA had just changed its principal to a man called Peter James, who was a theatre director and had run some major theatres in the UK. And a couple of my now colleagues there gave me a job and said, come and do some workshops with us. So I started working with young actors at LAMDA and really enjoyed the work, really enjoyed it. I found it, there's something very interesting about working with young actors who don't have perhaps the disappointment of the profession behind them. and that they are willing and more able to take risks and so forth. So from that point of view, it was very exhilarating work. So I was bouncing between doing my own work and work outside of the profession and work at Lambda. And gradually what happened was that I was asked to do more and more work at Lambda, so I became part of the stable, I suspect, is the best phrase. Then in about 2002, I think it was, I was given a commission to write, and that got me back into writing. I had to adapt the novel Frankenstein for a tour of Holland, Germany and Belgium. The Germany bit fell off, but the Holland and Belgium bit stayed, and I did an adaptation of Frankenstein, which I called Demons, which was about how Mary Shelley wrote the book and the after effects of that. I found a very interesting note in one of the biographies, which was about how she'd had an illegitimate child with Shelley, and the child had never been named. And for me, I made a connection between that and the idea that the creature that Frankenstein makes in the novel is never named. And so I looked at the idea that as she works on the novel, it's almost like she's working out something for herself about the past that's never been dealt with. And the play was, I mean, it was interesting. We had a very, very short time to put it together with 4 different acting companies. I think, in hindsight, there would have been a better way to rehearse it, but subsequent to that, it's been rewritten and it's now, in a much better shape. After that, I wrote a play called Some Kind of Arizona. I did 2 studio projects at Lambda with students. One was called A Last Hurrah, and the other was called Bloodlines. And then I did my own play in 2007, Some Kind of Arizona, for my own company, Hair's Breadth. That went on at the Warehouse Theatre, Croydon. And in that time, I was then appointed Vice Principal and Head of Acting at Lambda, and so consequently my time became taken up with the administration of the acting courses, working with the head of the school to plan directors and so forth, and eventually trying to find time, as most writers will know, when they've got to earn a living somewhere else, is sometimes very difficult. But last year I made a concerted effort. I said, I'm going to do a play, and I was very lucky. I had a group of actors that I could work with. They came in, they improvised with me, we took a scenario into a room, some scene ideas into a room. I had about 4, I think, at the time, and I knew roughly what I wanted to do with this play. And then they worked with me for a day. I took those improvisations away, the ideas from them. I transcribed some of the work that they came out with. I then was able to sort of jostle the scenes around and write new material. I then went back into a rehearsal room with them for some more exercises and so forth. More material was generated, and I ended up with a script. And at that point, I did a couple of rough drafts, working through the drafts just to tidy and polish. And then I took it back to the actors, and they read it. And at that point, I got a good deal of feedback. Some more rewriting happened, and then there were a couple of scenes that I knew weren't quite right. So I was able to have a day where I just nailed a few of those scenes, was able to reinvestigate them. And the beauty of working with good actors, like the actors I was able to work with, the beauty of working with actors is that, in a way, they are generous people, and they will give of their time and their insight. An actor knows when a moment is dead. And so what was very useful was, there was one scene which sort of finishes in the original draft, the first half of the play in my head, where a character just ended up making speech after speech after speech, and it was frightfully dull, really awful. So, it was very useful hearing it read, because suddenly you realise, oh no, that's not working. Although the passion and the idea behind it was what I was interested in, it just didn't work. So I was able to rework that with these actors. I came back to them with a new scene, and I think it's in a better place. So, as a working methodology, what I've found very useful is being able to work with actors and get them to read things. I'm lucky, because where I work at Lambda, there is an amazing resource in terms of young actors, and like I said before, actors can be incredibly generous. So for writers, I would say to any writer, if you can get a group of actors to read your material before you show it to an agent, before you show it to the industry, it will really help you. So the long and short of it is, that play is in the bag. It needs a few more tweaks, and and distance is always useful. So I've had 2.5 weeks away, and I've been mulling over a few things that I need to cut or edit and change. And so when I go back, I'll do another little tweak of the play, and again go back, talk to the agent, talk to my agent, and we'll see where we go with it. Alongside that, of course, I will also walk back to a full inbox, a pile of papers on my desk, and 2 repertoires of plays that have to be cast, picked, and signed off in the next couple of weeks. So, on Sunday, it might seem like the end of a teaching period of 2 weeks in India, but I'm going back to a full-time job. Anyhow. The screenplay writing came about by chance. I mean, I should put my hand up. I'm not an expert on screenplay writing. What I can come at, how I can come at screenplay writing is talking to writers about the underlying principles that drive a work. So when I was asked by Vicky Frames if I could do a workshop on script writing, I tend to think of it as script writing rather than screenplay or playwriting, partly because I think it's possible to move between genres, between forms. So when Vicky Frames asked me, could you do a session on script writing, I immediately said yes, and I'd be quite happy to work with the tools that I use. And some of these tools are tools that I've been given, by other people, and so there's a sort of sense of Creative Commons, pass those skills on and tools on to everybody else. And some of them are the result of experience, the sense that I've found a way of working that seems to work for me. So I have a very simple way into the storytelling and the screenplay writing. And part of it was rooted in Paul Thompson's work many years ago, and when I worked at the Playwright Studio in NIDA. But more of the work lately is to do with other people that I've encountered through my journey in terms of discovering how to write. How I like to work on a script is I like to work from a premise. And a friend of mine once said to me this thing that he'd read about Arthur Miller typing a sentence and sticking it on the front of his typewriter, so that if he was writing and working on a script, there was a focus in terms of what he wrote. And I think that was a real eye-opener, because it does connect to the idea of having a good, strong premise. And one of the things that I've always been interested in, and this comes from a tradition that I work with within theatre, is understanding that plays and scripts, generally speaking, ask questions. Ask questions of the people who are watching them, the society they are written within, etc. So for me, there's a sense in which if you start off with a question, the question provides the answer. And so if you can find a good, strong question that engages you as a writer in terms of something you want to explore, you will find the answer, and the answer is going to be within the story. So that's really how I start off in terms of writing. I look for the premise. What's the question? What's the question that the play, the screenplay, the television play, television script's going to pose in its episode, in its full length, or whatever form you're working in. If you find the question that engages you, what then I tend to do is work to find who or what it is that I can carry that question, explore that question. So in other words, sometimes it might be the main character. Who is the main character that I need to have in my story in order to explore this particular question? So yesterday in the session that I ran here at Vicky Frames, we started with some exercises, finding 5 or 6 questions that could generate, give you good grounds for premises. And it was quite interesting listening to the results, the things that were coming back from the different tables, because, as I said at the time, some of the premises immediately eliminate themselves, and then some of them will really, spark an interest. So, well, they did for me. So what I found fascinating about the offers that were coming back and the range of ideas was that actually it's a very simple thing to do. Within 5 or 10 minutes, we had 25 writers, young writers, aspiring writers, or industry professionals coming up with ideas very, very quickly that could be translated into more in-depth stories. So with that idea, you have a premise. We then looked at the idea of how do we find a character to turn this idea, this premise, into something that's actable. So through we did a little exercise with character creation sheet that I gave the participants, and on that sheet there are various questions. I didn't go into the sheet in too much detail because what I wanted the participants to do was just to react to what was on the page. But in doing that, what happened was that all of a sudden we had these amazing characters appear on the page with likes and dislikes, with things they'd like to do if they won the lottery, with a question that they struggled with. And the idea behind some of these questions is if you connect some of these questions to your premise, you're going to strengthen the potential of your story. So we did some work on character creation, and then what we looked at is, well, how do you then move from character to plot? And one of the things we looked at was the idea, or one of the things I proposed is the idea that for me as a writer, I have to know my ending. I have to know the ending. For the play I've just finished, the ending comes because Nick has to go back to his army base and go back to Afghanistan. He's on 2 weeks leave, so it starts with the first night at home and it ends with his last night at home. So I knew the end, I knew what happened to him, and I knew that he was going to go back. The play challenges why he might go back, for instance. So what we did with the participants was we got them to look at their main character and then ask the question: how do they end up? And relating that to the question of the premise. So there was one premise which was along the lines of, can a woman find true love or real love at 60? And it was based on the idea that perhaps a woman has had an arranged marriage, she has done her duty, she has had children, she has been with her husband, and what's happening is her family are growing up and leaving, her daughter is beginning to find a relationship, and she's sitting looking at her life and thinking, well, do I know what real love is like? And so that was the question, and then it becomes quite easy because you say to whoever's writing it, you say, well, does she find love at 60 or doesn't she? It's not hard, it's 50-50. And the decision was, yes, she does. So if we know that she finds love at the end of the story, and it's possible to find love at 60, true love at 60, what do? We try and put her in the opposite place at the beginning. So with that sort of simple device, simple way of looking at things, knowing your ending, what happens is that then you put your character in the opposite place at the beginning. And then we did a little exercise which was about how do you find perhaps 5 stepping stones on the route to tell your story. And so they were quite arbitrary. I mean, I said to them, just take 5 scenarios. And so therefore we just did 5 scenarios and we got those written down, we put them up on the board, and then we discovered that we could move them around. A lot of American screenwriters, I mean, this is a tip I picked up from a screenwriting book, I think it was, suggested using index cards, little 6x4s or 5x3 or whatever the sizes are. They're a very useful tool. Jot down the idea for the scene, who's in it, what the purpose of the scene is about, and there you've got your scene or your idea. And of course, once you've started this process, you've got 5 cards. Well, those 5 will, create opportunities and make you think about another 5 or 10. And so gradually over time, you can create a number of cards, as many as you need to tell your story. Some you're going to tear up, throw away. Some you're going to keep. Some will take you off on a different tangent. But as a writer, you're creating as much material as you can, so that eventually what you can do is you can then filter what you want, keep what you need, discard the rubbish, so that you're in a better place to perhaps write your treatment, a better place to write a beat-by-beat beat sheet, if that's a term you want to use, so that you've got a really strong framework for your story. You can see how it articulates, and actually at the end of the day, what it's going to help you with is making sure that you're keeping on track with your writing. Of course, there is no rule that says you have to start with a premise, then go to your character, then go to your plot. You might start with an idea for a scene. You might start with an idea for a character. But at some point, you are going to have to think about, what is this thing that I'm working on about? Where's it going? And so, in a way, I use these tools as a means to try and guide me. But I'm also well aware of the fact that sometimes I might just want to throw those ideas away, start again. Like I said at the time, there are no rules. We had a bit of a discussion about the sort of there are sort of books out there which say, you know, the turning point for Act 1 happens on page 28. There is a midpoint on page 60. There's a turning point again on page, 88 to 90, and then a climax happens, page 110 onwards. The problem with that way of thinking is that, in a way, it creates a problem for the writer who hasn't even written a word, in that they're thinking, oh my God, have I satisfied that brief? Have I satisfied the paradigm? And what I would tend to say to you is, go and write the thing, go and work slowly through it, day by day. Here, today, now is the phrase that I used in the workshop, which comes from a Stanislavski training, to do with acting. But go write the material, write your screenplay, then you can go back and and if you have to satisfy a paradigm because a producer wants to see it, then you can go back and tighten up your work so that you can find these points. I think what those screenwriter, teachers are suggesting is that in the vast majority of films and storytelling that use film as a medium, you will find those elements. But the difficulty for young writers is that what happens is that they think, there's the problem, I haven't got this turning point on 28. Who cares? It might be on 27, it could be on 29. The point is, these things might emerge in your story, they might not. But if they don't, who cares? I mean, the ultimate aim is to try and tell your story as best you can, and then go back and rewrite, cut, rewrite, edit, polish it up. So that's how I tend to think about writing, tend to think about the work. I try not to follow too many rules. I think the difficulty with rules is that people then start to think about, oh, have I satisfied the rule, rather than have I told the story? Tell the story first, then go and do the work, other forms of work, based upon where it might be going, the particular genre or milieu that you're working in. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
I'm not an expert, I couldn't really say, but what I have read about the world of the writer, in the screenwriter in the West, is that it depends very much on your status. I think Abby Morgan talked recently about turning up on a film set and almost being ignored. Because in a way, from the production point of view, her work was done. And she was a theatre writer, where you tend to be much more hands-on as a theatre writer, or at least much more involved in the process of rehearsal and so on. There's always a time when, of course, the director and the actors want the writer to get out of the room. I have to say that. I, as a writer, have worked as a director too of my own work. I've now got to the point where I don't want to do that at all, because there are pitfalls with that. In one instance, I was very, very lucky because I had a terrific actor, Sancha MacDonald, who we had 3 days of very nice, polite rehearsal room behaviour, and then she turned around and she said, "John, can I talk to you about this moment?" And at that point, we sort of opened the doors to the discussion about, is this necessary, can we cut this? And between us, I think over the course of the rehearsal period, we cut 17 pages. Now, that's a very hands-on way of doing things. My understanding of the film world is that it can be very different. So, for instance, you might be engaged to write a screenplay, in which case that is your job. You are paid to write the screenplay, you deliver the screenplay, and perhaps you might have a clause in your contract where you may have the first pass at a rewrite, i.e. from notes from the producer or the director or so forth, and then at some point that contract comes to an end, and at that point they'll either be happy with the script that they've got, or they may actually bring their own writer in, and therefore your connection to the work ceases. For those of us who come from a theatre background, that can seem incredibly brutal and very, very tough. But I think you have to learn to manage it. You have to learn to manage it. From everything that I've read and from screenwriters that I've met, they a couple of screenwriters have said to me, yes, it is tough, that moment, but then actually you recognise that it is a job, and so therefore that part of my job is over. Obviously, if other writers come in on your projects and substantial rewrites, then there are always negotiations about who gets the credits and on the titles and so forth. And I think that the American market is a very different beast. But I think it is very much seen as it is a job. It's show business, and we shouldn't forget that side of things. So even if you're as a writer, you're writing a speculative script. I'm currently working on a speculative spec script, with a Polish filmmaker that I know. We're working on a story. The story is coming together. Perhaps there will be a draft of this script by the end of the year. I'd like that to be the case. At that point, then we have to think about how do we get it made. And at some point, it may come about that the script gets sold and is bought by somebody else. And when that happens, I have to think about, well, do I walk away and just say thank you very much, or how do I keep my connection to it? So I don't know the real answer to help you as writers, if you're able to keep connected to the work. I mean, from my point of view, I come from a theatre background. Theatre is about collaboration. It seems to me daft that film gets taken over by the directors, and the collaborative nature of a writer seeing the actor's work isn't brought into that process, so that you can actually edit. You can do it on the job. You can. It's not impossible. And that sort of sense of the writer being part of the collaborative process of making a film, I think, is something that would be really exciting. But in the UK, and certainly I think in the US, once you deliver your script, it's not necessarily, you may be in a situation where you are no longer part of that process. Your contract's over, it's done. You've been paid, off you go, enjoy the beach. The beauty of theatre, I think, is that it does have a different quality. Theatre relies on the audience's imagination. The fact that they can come into a bare room, you put a chair in that room, it could become a throne. Theatre allows you to explore perhaps the decisions that characters make in some detail, and it has a different. For me, it has a more immediate life. I think theatre can be much more responsive to the world in which we live. Why I say that is that sometimes the genesis of the play through to production is a shorter time span than for films. With filmmaking, you've got to write the script, you've then got to try and get the actors, and then you've got to try and get the actors who are, you might have actors whose schedules are fully booked up for another 2 years or so forth. By which time is there still interest in the project? And so a film might get made 2 years down the track. Then you've got maybe a year's post-production. So all of a sudden you're looking at 4 or 5 years perhaps to getting a film made, from its inception as an idea through to the finished product. So although film can have this sort of sense of touching a zeitgeist, as it were, the mood of the time, I don't think it can be as responsive, perhaps, unless you've got some very good, bankrollers, as it were, to the immediate moment. Theatre has a much more immediate, for me, the immediate moment quality about it. So in terms of writing, I think 2 things. One is, I told a story yesterday about a director I knew in England, John Link, who had played tennis with the Scott brothers in LA. There was a time in his life when he was working in LA, and he told me a lovely story about a screenwriter who had a scene, and one of the Scott brothers turned around and said, they'd read the scene, and they said, which 2 lines do you want to keep? Now this scene might have been a beautifully crafted scene, 2 or 3 pages long, which might be fine for theatre. But in film, and with their knowledge of film, they said to this writer, which 2 lines do you want to keep? And that as an idea, I think, is terribly useful. Economy in film writing seems to be the key. I mean, I would say it's in theatre writing anyhow. But in theatre you can extend a scene, you can explore character in a different way, and use time and silence in a way that you might not necessarily be able to use in film. What I said to a lot of the participants yesterday evening, towards the end, is, when in doubt, go and read. Read as many screenplays as you can. Read as many plays as you can. The more knowledge you have of plays, script writing, story writing, the more knowledge you have, the greater your understanding is going to be about how do you frame your work. And there's nothing wrong with seeing how other writers did it. Nick Heitner, who's the artistic director of the National Theatre, once said to Simon Stevens, who's a very well-known British playwright, when Simon Stevens apparently asked him, what should I read? Nick Heitner turned around and said to him, you need to read Euripides and Sophocles, because if you read the Greeks, you'll understand how a writer can swing an audience's perception of an event. You'll also read and understand something about play structure and how stories can be unfolded. And I mean, for me, because I come from, that's my background, I would say Shakespeare is very useful for some things. The broader your reading, the more opportunities you have to draw on that knowledge of how others have done it before you. So I would say that, horses for courses, read as many screenplays as you can. Get in touch with production offices, get in touch with producers, ask if you can get copies of screenplays that you the screenplays for films you admired in terms of form and so forth. There are a number of websites that you can go to get screenplays from certainly American movies, and of course there are publishers who publish screenplays. Read them, read and learn, style and form, but go and read them, because what you'll see is how form and how style has changed, and as a result you'll see how economic writing has become for today's market. So that's what I would always recommend writers to do. Read as much as you can in your field and outside it. Read novels, read myths, read. Keep writing. Keep writing, get it all out. Don't wait until you think it's right. Just get it out. You can always make it better. And that for me is the key, actually, is the idea of always ask yourself, not whether it's good or bad, always ask yourself the question, how can I make it better? If you ask yourself, how can I make it better, you take away the negativity and you're always moving yourself positive. And be ruthless, be ruthless with your work. Be tough on yourself in the sense of, is it really necessary? Does it move the story forward? If it doesn't, cut. Get rid of it. Because you know that the director will.